Hey everybody, thanks for tuning into my channel once again. It is the final week of the regular season for the 2021-2022 college football season, week 13. It is also rivalry weekend. We've got some big matchups that have conference championship game implications. I will run through those scenarios. And there's also games that have CFP playoff implications. And I'll highlight those games as we get to them. Before I get to the picks for this week, though, please be sure to like this video and share it with anyone and everyone you think would enjoy it. Also, please subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell so you'll be alerted to any new videos that drop on my channel. I have been negligent in the last few videos updating you about what my record has been. The last 3 weeks have been exceptionally kind to me, and I've done very, very well. For week 10's picks, I went 18-5 overall. I went 1-0 in my top 25 picks, and there were no top 10 picks that week. Week 11, I went 17-2, 3-1 in the top 25 picks, and there were no top 10 matchups that week. And then last week, week 12, I went 20-2. That brings my overall record to 187-52 on the year. I went 2-1 in my top 25 picks. The only one I got wrong was the absolute drubbing that Utah gave to Oregon. That brings my overall top 25 record to 24-9. And I went 1-0 in my top 10 picks, correctly predicting that Ohio State was going to beat Michigan State. Blah, 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 blah. That brings my top 10 record to 7-0 on the season. So 3 weeks where I have gotten hotter and hotter on my picks. Let's see if we could keep the momentum going this week. It is, as I mentioned a moment ago, rivalry week. There are games like The Game, Michigan and Ohio State. There's Bedlam between Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. There's the Territorial Cup between Arizona and Arizona State. There's the Commonwealth Cup, Virginia and Virginia Tech. There's the matchup between Oregon and Oregon State. There's the historic rivalry between Notre Dame and Stanford. There are lots of good games going on this week, even against teams that aren't playing very well. The big matchup between Florida and Florida State features 2 5-6 teams competing to see who's going to be bowl eligible this year. Before we get to the actual picks for this week, let's run down some conference championship game scenarios for the 5 Power 5 conferences and the American Athletic Conference. Let's start in my home territory, the Big Ten. This one's not super difficult. In the Big Ten East, the winner of Michigan and Ohio State will go to the Big Ten championship game as the representative from the East. So it's basically win and you're in for both of those teams. In the West, though, things get a bit more complicated. There are 3 teams that have a shot, depending on how things break. Wisconsin has the easiest path. If they win against Minnesota, they are in. They will represent the Big Ten from the Western Division in the Big Ten championship game, which would be a pretty phenomenal story for a team that started the season 1-3. Or if Wisconsin loses to Minnesota, but both Iowa and Purdue also lose, Wisconsin would still go to the Big Ten championship game as the representative from the West. Iowa also has a relatively straightforward path. If they win over Nebraska and Wisconsin loses to Minnesota, the Iowa Hawkeyes will represent the Big Ten from the Western Division in the Big Ten championship game. Minnesota has a bit more of a complicated path. They need to not only beat Wisconsin, but they also need Purdue to beat Indiana, and they need a couple of other tiebreakers to kind of break their way, a couple of minor things to break their way. They don't have a real solid path to getting there. It's more than likely going to come down to either Iowa or Wisconsin getting into the Big Ten title game as the West's representative. If we move to the Big 12, Oklahoma State's in. There is no scenario where Oklahoma State doesn't get into the Big 12 championship game. It's just a matter of who they're going to face. They're taking on Oklahoma in the Bedlam game at Oklahoma State this week. If Oklahoma wins that game, the Big 12 championship will be a rematch between Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. If Oklahoma loses the game to Oklahoma State, but Baylor also loses its game to Texas Tech, then the Big 12 championship game will be a rematch between Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. If Oklahoma State wins Bedlam and Baylor beats Texas Tech, the Big 12 championship game will be Oklahoma State taking on Baylor. So Oklahoma State's in no matter what. Oklahoma is in a couple of different scenarios. Baylor needs to win, and they need Oklahoma to lose in order for them to get in to the championship game. The SEC championship game is the simplest one of all. We already know who the participants are. It's Georgia from the East and Alabama from the West, and that's it. Moving west to the Pac-12, Utah is already in. They have won the Pac-12 South, so they're in. The Pac-12 North can come down to 3 teams, with Oregon having the best shot. If Oregon beats their in-state rival Oregon State this week, they're in. And it sets up a rematch against Utah 2 weeks after Utah absolutely housed them in Utah. The Pac-12 title game will be at a neutral site, probably in Los Angeles. Oregon State, though, can qualify for the Pac-12 title game if they beat Oregon and if Washington beats Washington State in the Apple Cup. Washington State can get in if they beat Washington in the Apple Cup and if Oregon State beats Oregon in that matchup. So for Oregon, it's simple. Win and you're in. Oregon State and Washington State both need someone else to lose in addition to them winning for them to represent the Pac-12 North in the Pac-12 championship game. Moving back east to the ACC, Pittsburgh is already in. They've already qualified for the championship game. Wake Forest has the most straightforward path. If they beat Boston College this weekend, they're in and they will take on Pittsburgh. North Carolina State can still get in if they beat North Carolina and if Wake Forest loses to Boston College. Then North Carolina State would take on Pittsburgh in the championship game. And as surprising as it might be, the win against Wake Forest last week still qualifies Clemson to perhaps get into the ACC title game. If they beat South Carolina this week and Wake Forest and NC State both lose, then Clemson goes to the ACC championship game to take on Pittsburgh in a rematch from earlier this season. It's amazing to me that Clemson still is in one of these scenarios, although they need a lot of help. And then finally, let's move to the American Athletic Conference because this has potential playoff implications. The Cincinnati Bearcats are already in, and so are the Houston Cougars. They're both already in. They're going to play each other. It just depends on where the game is going to be. The American Athletic Conference, they let the best team host the game. It's not at a neutral site like all of the Power 5 championship games are. If Cincinnati wins this week against East Carolina, they will host Houston next week in the championship game. If Cincinnati loses to East Carolina, Houston will host the AAC championship game. So that one's actually really simple as well because we already know the participants. We just don't know where that game is going to be played quite yet. So those are your scenarios for the Power 5 championship games and the American Athletic Conference championship game, which again, the importance of that I'll get to momentarily. Let's get to the actual picks then and see if I can keep up this amazing hot streak I've been on and get myself to 200 correct picks. I'm at 187. So I need 13 correct picks in order to get there in the regular season. Let's start with the number 1 team in the nation, the Georgia Bulldogs. They're on the road against Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech ain't no good. They got drubbed at Notre Dame 55-0 last week. This game is going to be over by halftime. Go with Georgia. The new number 2 team coming off that big win against Michigan State, the Ohio State Buckeyes. They are on the road, coming to Ann Arbor in probably the biggest game of the season besides maybe Georgia and Clemson earlier this year. They are taking on the Michigan Wolverines. As I mentioned a moment ago, the winner of this game will go to the Big Ten championship game and will almost certainly be heavily favored against anybody coming out of the West, whether it's Minnesota, whether it's Iowa, or whether it's Wisconsin. I think especially if it's Ohio State, I think they'll be more heavily favored than Michigan would be against those teams, but I still think Michigan would be pretty heavily favored against any of those opponents. And if they were to win that game, there's no way you would deny either Michigan or Ohio State, each with one loss and a Big Ten championship under their belt, entry into the college football playoff as one of the top 4 teams. So this is a first step towards potentially getting a playoff berth. And it is one of the most heated, if not the most heated rivalry game that exists in college football today. My gut has been telling me 2 seemingly contradictory things that it's taken me a long time to reconcile on this. The game's at Michigan. So you know it's going to be sold out, and you know those fans are going to be going out of their minds with their main heated, hated rival coming to town. Michigan is no slouch. They've got a good defense, despite some performances that weren't so good, like against Michigan State in their loss earlier this year. They've got a very good offense with a 2-headed running attack with Blake Corum and Hassan Haskins. Their defensive front is especially good with Aiden Hutchinson and David Ajabo, making things difficult for opposing quarterbacks. Quarterback Kade Mcnamara showed against Michigan State, and I think in one other game after that he can be trusted to throw the ball even to some wide receivers that don't get a lot of renown, that aren't really well thought of, that don't get a lot of attention nationally or even regionally from conference writers and sports pundits and the like. He's shown that he can play and he can win games. They can always bring in their backup quarterback, J.J. McCarthy, to throw a new wrinkle into their offense, to give their offense a spark if it's being a bit lackluster. Things that Ohio State's defense would have to keep in mind and have to game plan for. They also did a fake kick last week. That is something I think they did that against Maryland when they were up big, specifically to give Ohio State something that they'd have to plan for. It makes Ohio State think, oh, okay, now we got to think about trick plays that Michigan might run against us. On the one hand, my gut tells me that there is a lot to recommend Michigan win in this game. Jim Harbaugh is 0-5 against Ohio State. How long can that streak continue before he finally gets at least a single win against them? This Ohio State team is not the same Ohio State team from the last 2 or 3 years, especially on the defensive side. The era of the Bosa brothers and Chase Young is over. They've got good talent, don't get me wrong, but they just haven't seemed to be able to put it together against some top-flight talent outside of the game against Michigan State. Their offense has sometimes been a bit pedestrian. They've played really big games where they put up a lot of points. They've thrown the ball around for a lot of yards. They've got a really good running back in Travion Henderson. But there have been some games where they've just kind of sleptwalked their way through them until the end when they needed to pick it up and win a game. They can't do that against Michigan. The game's at Michigan, so they're walking in to a hostile territory are the Buckeyes. How are they going to defend against the 2-headed running attack of Corum and Haskins, both of which are very good running backs? Michigan's got a good offensive line that can make holes that those running backs can get through. They can run stretch plays to outrun the defense on the edges. And since they've got these backs that can give each other a rest, they can stay strong throughout the entire game. And if you want to do something like Michigan State did to Michigan and stop the run against Corum and Haskins, well, Kade McNamara, as I said a moment ago, has proven that he can play. He's proven that he can throw the ball. His wide receivers have proven that they are not slouches, that they are at least good wide receivers, nice to good wide receivers. Maybe not great, but they can at least get the job done. So it's not like Michigan is a completely one-dimensional offense. They can pass if they need to. It's just head coach Jim Harbaugh doesn't really want to do that all that often. They also have, as I mentioned a moment ago, the wild card in J.J. McCarthy and throwing him in, letting him run the ball, letting him do some wildcat stuff, letting him throw the ball around as a new wrinkle that you might not be prepared for on defense. On the other hand, though, there's a reason why Ohio State has won 5 in a row against Jim Harbaugh. And there's a reason why Ohio State, I think, has won 19 of the past 21 in this series. And it's because they're dang good. They've got a ton of talent, especially on the offensive end. Just ask my Michigan State Spartans all about that, who were down 49-0 at halftime because they couldn't stop the three-headed wide receiver trio that quarterback C.J. Stroud has available to him. Oh, and they've got a freshman running back in Travion Henderson who's having the best year since Maurice Claret's freshman year when I believe Ohio State won a national championship that year. So Ohio State isn't a bunch of bums. They are a dang good team, especially on the offensive side of the ball. They're going to try to get theirs. I don't believe this game's going to be as lopsided as it's been in the past. I don't believe this is going to be as lopsided as Michigan State's game against Ohio State was. So, on the one hand, my gut's been telling me that Michigan is going to win this game because I think a lot of what you're looking at leans in Michigan's favor in this game. But there's another part of me that says maybe this is just an era where Ohio State just has it, where they just can beat Michigan even if they're not on the top of their game. So, it took me a while, but I reconciled those two seemingly contradictory positions, and this is what I think is going to happen in this game. I think Michigan comes out hot. I think Michigan comes out firing. I think they get a lead early, and I think it looks like at one point in the game that they've got Ohio State on the ropes, and that they're ready to go in for a killing blow, but they don't get it. And I think Ohio State just slowly creeps back in the game, builds momentum, and in the second half, I think they pull it out, and I think Ohio State escapes from Ann Arbor with a win. I think this is a very close game, maybe an overtime game, but I think Ohio State has just enough, and I think Michigan's offense is not as explosive as it needs to be to keep up with Ohio State once those dudes get rolling. Because once the Buckeyes on offense come to play, I think even the top defense in the nation, the Georgia Bulldogs, would have a bit of a problem with them. And Michigan's defense ain't Georgia's defense. So I think Michigan puts up a dang good fight. I think they take a lead in this game early. I think it looks like they're going to win this game, but I think Ohio State does enough in the second half, especially in the fourth quarter. They pull one out of their rear ends. They escape from Ann Arbor, and I think they go on to the Big Ten championship game. Sorry, Michigan fans, but I just don't think this is your year yet again. Let's move on to the number 3 team in the nation, Alabama, playing Auburn at Auburn in the Iron Bowl. On paper, this game looks like it's going to be a beatdown in Alabama's favor because Auburn is not good. They've got their backup quarterback, Finley, in, Bo Nix out last week and this week with injuries. However, it's the Iron Bowl, and it's at Auburn. Weird things happen in rivalry games. I would not be surprised if head coach for Auburn, Brian Harsin, has a few tricks up his sleeve to try to keep the game somewhat close. And as we've seen, this is not the same Alabama team from last year or the year before. This is an Alabama team that struggled against Florida, who has proven to be not very good this year. This is an Alabama team that struggled against LSU, who was not very good this year. This is an Alabama team that lost to Texas A&M with a backup quarterback on the road. So they're going on the road against a backup quarterback. I would not be surprised if Auburn made a game of this in a heated rivalry I do think Alabama's going to win this game. I think they pull it out at the end. I think they pull away in the second half. But don't be surprised if Auburn keeps this game close for the first half, maybe even into the third quarter. The number 4 team in the nation, the Cincinnati Bearcats. The College Football Playoff Committee made the right choice in this, although they really didn't have much of a choice. Cincinnati beat down an 8-2 SMU team last week. The then number 3 team, Oregon, got trucked by Utah. So there was really no choice except to make Cincinnati the number 4 team in the nation. They now are the highest ranked group of 5 school in the playoff era. I know that only goes back until 2014, but still, it's a worthy accomplishment to note. They are on the road against East Carolina, who's 7-4, so not necessarily slouches. And you have to think Cincinnati's had an amazing season. Is there going to be a letdown game? And could this game, the last game of the regular season, be that letdown game, knowing that, okay, now this is real. Now that we're ranked 4, if we can hold serve for 2 more games, we will get into the college football playoff. Does that distract them a bit? Are they looking ahead to the Titanic matchup against a 1-loss Houston team in the AAC championship game? And do they overlook the Pirates? I don't think that they do. I think they go into this game. I don't think they play their best game. I think they play a game that's a bit lackluster, but I think they get the job done. I think they beat East Carolina. Go with Cincinnati. Number 5, Michigan. I said I think they're going to lose to OSU. So move on to the number 6, Notre Dame Fighting Irish. They are on the road against Stanford. Stanford only has 3 wins on the season. They did pull an upset in Stanford against Oregon earlier this season. Do I think they're going to do that against Notre Dame? No, I do not. This is not the same Notre Dame team that we saw early on in the season that was struggling mightily. They've fixed their offense. They've patched together a dang good defense. They are steamrolling people. I think they steamroll Stanford. And then since they're not in a conference this year, this is their last game. They're done. They're going to sit home next week and just watch the championship games and hope that a couple of teams above them drop one and see if they can sneak into the CFP. Number 7, the Oklahoma State Cowboys are taking on the number 10 Oklahoma Sooners in the Bedlam game. This game is at Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State coach Mike Gundy, I think I heard this week, he is something like 2-14 in this game. So Oklahoma has owned him in this series. This is a different Oklahoma State team, though. The Big 12, is weird this year because they're actually playing defense. And when you watch Big 12 games, you're like, wait, what is this? Where's the 62-61 games? They're playing defense in the Big 12? I thought they forgot what defense even meant. Oklahoma's got an improved defense. Oklahoma State's got one of the best defenses in the nation. Baylor's got a dang good defense. There are teams in the Big 12 that are making hay not by shootouts and putting up 600 yards of offense, 700 yards of offense, but by playing dang good defense and just bleeding you dry over the course of a game. Oklahoma State can do that. Oklahoma, meanwhile, has been very shaky on offense. Yeah, they whooped Texas Tech by like 50 points. Yeah, they beat West Carolina by 76. But they've had rocky games against Kansas, the Kansas Jayhawks. That's weird. They've had rocky games against a subpar Iowa State team, only winning that game by a touchdown. This Oklahoma offense is not all that it's cracked up to be, and they have flaws. And they don't always play to their ability. They've got a freshman quarterback in Caleb Williams who sometimes doesn't perform up to his talent and doesn't elevate the offense like he can. There are times when he makes amazing plays and leads incredible comebacks like against Texas earlier this season. But then there are other games like against Nebraska where he struggles mightily. I think Oklahoma State's defense is going to get the job done in this one. I think Oklahoma State's defense is going to give Caleb Williams trouble. I think they're going to throw looks at him that he hasn't seen before. I think they're going to confuse him. And I think Oklahoma State's offense is strong enough that they can score some points on Oklahoma's defense. And I think they're going to do the exact same thing that they did in their game last week against Texas Tech. And I think this game is low scoring early. And I think Oklahoma State just slowly pulls away. And I think they win this game. And I think, well, I'm going to get to that with the next pick. So I think they're going to win the Bedlam game. And I think they're going to carry a lot of momentum going in to the Big 12 championship game. Which, whether they play Oklahoma or whether they play Baylor, if they were able to win against Oklahoma this week and then win against if they beat Oklahoma, Oklahoma's probably not going to drop out of the top 15. If a number 10 team loses to a number 17, Oklahoma's probably not going to drop out of the top 15 or 16. And if Oklahoma State goes on and plays, say, like a top 10 Baylor team and beats them in the Big 12 championship game, and they finish 12-1 with a conference championship, having won 2 top 10 matchups in back-to-back weeks, that's a very strong case to get them into the college football playoff this year. A very, very strong case. And I think they want that. But I don't think Coach Gundy for Okie State is looking ahead that far. I think he wants Oklahoma, and I think he wants them bad. I think he can smell that he can get them this year when his team is having a phenomenal year. So let's go with Oklahoma State and the Cowboys. The number 8 team in the nation, also from the Big 12, the Baylor Bears. They are home versus Texas Tech. If Baylor is able to win this game, they can get themselves into the Big 12 championship game, as I was laying out the scenarios earlier. If Oklahoma State beats Oklahoma, which I think they will, and Baylor beats Texas Tech, which I think they will, then it will be Okie State versus Baylor in another top 10 matchup. This time, though, not just for all the marbles in the Big 12, but also potentially for a college football playoff spot, especially if you're Okie State and you got 1 loss. Baylor's already got 2 on the season, so I'm not sure if they've got enough to get into the CFP. Okie State would, though, with only 1 loss. Texas Tech is not very good. Baylor is very good, and I think they know that they've got a shot. They can't control the Okie State-Oklahoma matchup, but they can control theirs. So I think they get their business done. I think the calm, cool, stoic head coach for Baylor, Dave Aranda, I think he gets the job done. I think he gets his players focused. I think they win this game handily, and I think they wait to see what happens for who they're going to play in the Big 12 championship game. Number 9, the Ole Miss Running Rebels. They played last night in the Egg Bowl against in-state rival Mississippi State. I did make a pick for this game on my Facebook page. I called Ole Miss to win, so I've already started out this weekend 1-0, so not too bad. The number 10 team, the Oklahoma State Sooners, I just said they're going to lose to number 7 Oklahoma State in the Bedlam game. Number 11 Oregon is at home in Eugene versus in-state rival Oregon State. This Oregon State Beavers team is not bad. They've got their head coach, I believe his name's Mike Smith, who used to be a quarterback from Oregon State, and he's got this program trending in the right direction. They play good ball, they've got a good running game, they've got a good offensive line, they play some nice defense. Oregon, though, after that drubbing they took against Utah, knowing that if they get past Oregon State, Utah's waiting for them again, I think they want that rematch so badly. I think Oregon head coach Mario Cristobal is just seething after how badly his team played in Oregon last week. I think he's going to have them focused. I think they beat Oregon State, and I think they look forward to handling Utah on a neutral field in the Pac-12 championship game. So let's go with the Ducks. Number 12, the Michigan State Spartans, dropping out of the top 10 after their loss against Ohio State. Blech. They are home this week, returning to the friendly confines of East Lansing, Michigan, to take on Penn State. Penn State's like Nebraska. They're not that good, but they're a tough out. I think Michigan State is going to struggle a little bit in this game. Penn State quarterback Sean Clifford is a gamer. They've got a good wide receiver in Jahan Dotson, who is going to give Michigan State's garbage secondary a lot of trouble. But they don't have, Penn State doesn't have a three-headed monster at wide receiver like Ohio State did. So Michigan State just has to deal with basically one guy. If they can put a little bit of pressure on Clifford, and then especially if they can finally do what I've been asking them to do and just give a team 30, 35 looks at Kenneth Walker III. Walker only had 6 carries in the game last week because Michigan State fell behind so early for 24 yards, so bye-bye Heisman Trophy for him. But he can make up for that if Michigan State would just play a little more ball control. If Mel Tucker would only understand that his secondary cannot be on the field for that long. So how do you keep your defense off the field? You keep your offense on the field. And how do you keep your offense on the field? Well, you give them a very heavy dose of KW3. You give him a very heavy dose, like I said, 30, 35 carries, work him into the pass game, let him eat up clock and deny Sean Clifford a chance to connect with Dotson and tear apart your secondary. I think Michigan State does get this win. I think they finish the season with 10 wins, and I think they get themselves a nice bowl game at the end of the season. Go with the Spartans. Number 13, the Cougars from BYU are at University of Southern California. USC ain't no good. I'll take BYU in this one. Number 14, the Wisconsin Badgers are on the road at the Minnesota Golden Gophers. I laid out the Big Ten scenarios, and Wisconsin had the simplest one. If they beat Minnesota, they're into the Big Ten championship game. I think they do just that. I think Wisconsin is one of the hottest teams in the nation right now. After a 1-3 start, they're now 8-3, having run off 7 straight victories. Their defense has ascended to being one of the top defenses in the nation. Without Mo Ibrahim, their star running back, Minnesota has trouble on offense. And I think Wisconsin's defense eats them up. I think Wisconsin wins this game and punches their ticket to the Big Ten championship game. Number 15, the Texas A&M Aggies. They are at LSU. These teams have had a classic matchup a couple of years ago that went into multiple overtimes. Texas A&M won it. It was like 75-73 or something ridiculous like that. LSU got them back the next year with the Joe Burrow-led national championship team. I think this season, LSU is not that good. Texas A&M is not great, but they're good, and they're better than LSU, so I'm going to go with Texas A&M on this one. The number 16 Iowa Hawkeyes, they are on the road at Nebraska. For some reason, ESPN's Football Power Index is giving Nebraska like a 58% chance to win this game, despite the fact that they're without their starting quarterback, Adrian Martinez. He's out for this game. I think because of that, I think Iowa's defense will rise to the occasion again. Look for this to be yet another low-scoring affair. I think Iowa pulls this one out. This isn't a night game. Night games in Lincoln can be dangerous, potentially. Just ask Michigan about that. They were lucky to escape from Lincoln earlier this season. It's not a night game. It's a 1:30 start. I think Iowa does enough to get the job done in this one, even though their offense is pathetically bad. They've scored over 20 points in the last couple of games, including 27 last week. So, they scored 33 points in their game last week against Illinois. So without Adrian, if Nebraska had Adrian Martinez, I would be much more willing to call the upset on this one. Bad offense for Iowa on the road. Adrian Martinez isn't a good quarterback, but he's decent enough that if Iowa's defense can't get a turnover, then maybe you score enough points to eke out a win. But without Martinez, I think Iowa's going to take this one. Number 17, the Pitt Panthers. They are on the road at Syracuse. As I mentioned earlier, they've already punched their ticket to the ACC championship game. Syracuse, I don't think, is all that good. Their quarterback is a good runner, but he can't throw the ball worth a dang. Kenny Pickett, the quarterback for Pittsburgh, is a veteran. He knows how to get his team into a position to win. Go with the Pitt Panthers on this one. Number 18, the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. As I said earlier, they are on the road this week against Boston College, who's lost a couple of games recently here. If Wake Forest wins, they punch their ticket to the ACC championship game to take on Pitt. I think they will do just that. They've got a good quarterback in Sam Hartman. They've got a very good offense that can put up points. Boston College, I don't think will be able to keep up with them. Go with Wake Forest on this one. Number 19, Utah, coming off their big win against number 3, Oregon. Utah, last week, I believe, was ranked like in the 20s, so they only went up like 5 spots, I think, after taking down the number 3 team in the nation. That seems like it's not enough. Anyways, that Utah team is home versus Colorado. Colorado is not a good team. Look for Utah to capitalize and win that game to build some momentum and maybe look forward to a rematch against the Ducks in the Pac-12 title game. Number 20, NC State. They are home against North Carolina. North Carolina is up and then they're down and then they're up and then they're down as my hand motions don't match what I'm saying. They're up and then they're down. There we go. That's better. I never know what I'm going to get out of North Carolina. Am I going to get the North Carolina that racks up points and beats Wake Forest, or that, that comes close to beating Wake Forest? Or am I going to get the North Carolina team that drops one to Florida State? Where am I getting? Am I getting the North Carolina team that reeled off a couple of straight wins earlier this season? Or am I getting the North Carolina that lost to Virginia Tech at the beginning of the season and looked really bad doing it? I don't know. It's on the road for North Carolina. It's at NC State. NC State knows that they got to win if they want even a shot at the ACC championship game. I think they get the job done. Go with NC State. Number 21, the San Diego State Aztecs. They are home against the Boise State Broncos. You know how much I love my Boise State Broncos. However, it's not on the Smurf turf. It's in San Diego, so the Aztecs don't have to deal with the cold, potentially crap weather in Boise. I'm going to go with San Diego State. If they win this game, they are going to finish their season. I didn't write it down. I think they're going to finish their season with just 1 or 2 losses. And I think they're going to be, or already are, in the Mountain West Championship game. So I'm going to go with San Diego State. I've been rolling with them for a number of weeks now. They've only let me down 1 time. I'll roll with them again. Although Boise did take down a top 10 team in BYU on the road earlier this season. So let's not be surprised if they beat San Diego State. Number 22, UTSA. The Roadrunners coming off quite literally a last-second touchdown win against UAB at home last week. They are 11-0 on the season. They are at the University of North Texas. I don't know anything about North Texas, but I like the Roadrunners. I want them to go undefeated. Let's roll with UTSA. Number 23, the Clemson Tigers crawling their way back into the top 25. They are on the road at South Carolina. South Carolina is a nice team. They got 6 wins with a win against Auburn last week. They're going bowling. Clemson's playing very good over the last few games, especially defensively. I think Clemson wins this game. Go with the Tigers. Number 24, Houston. Houston's 10-1. They lost the very first game of the season to Texas Tech at home after they were up by like 3 touchdowns in that game. And they've reeled off 10 straight wins, and yet they're only ranked 24th in the nation. Absolutely absurd. They are on the road at UConn, who is one of the absolute worst, most abysmal college football programs in the nation. Houston's going to go to 11-1 and set up a massive matchup in the AAC championship game against Cincinnati, where they can play a huge spoiler role by potentially knocking Cincinnati out of playoff contention. Go with the Houston Cougars. And then number 25, the Arkansas Razorbacks. They are home versus Missouri. I don't know too much about Mizzou, but I know Arkansas, when they're on their game, they're a tough team to beat. So I'm going to roll with the Razorbacks on this one. Go with Arkansas. That does it for this week's picks for the final week of the regular season for the 2021-2022 college football year. I've also gone over some of the championship game scenarios for you. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm looking forward to seeing you all next week for some championship game picks and a preview of what I think is going to happen in the college football playoff. Be sure to like this video, share it with everyone you think that would like it. Also, be sure to subscribe to my channel and turn on the notifications so that way you'll get alerted to when new videos drop on my channel. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'll see you all next week.